Hello and welcome to Masters of Divinity. I am your moderator, JP, and this is a recording that Father Chuck will be reacting off of. Uh-huh.
Pause for effect.
Uh-huh. Oh, that is really funny, yeah. No, why would you do that?
Hey, I was realized looking at myself in the corner laughing at this.
Yeah.
Have you seen our benefactor, Mike,
Yeah.
and his amazing new computer monitor that he got?
I haven't.
He posted it on Facebook the other day. It's funny. Like
I don't think we're Facebook friends, but that's not
okay.
that's not because of anything personal, Mike. That is because I try to avoid Facebook as much as possible.
Right, and that's what's funny is so do I. Like I only go on Facebook to post links to church stuff that I do.
Right. Yeah.
And I happened to be on yesterday because I'm trying to make counts of like how many people tune into our online stuff at church. And I went on and the first thing was greeted was, you know, this picture of him, this enormous, like one of those curved monitors that he got like as a Christmas present.
Those are
and
nice.
I'm like, and I only bring this up because I'm like, Mike, bro, you've got to take a picture of what we look like on this thing.
It's just like a little box in the corner. Like this is as good as it gets, guys. Sorry. We're like the Scream
I would love
DVD.
to, like, stored it.
The Scream DVD that I watched over Halloween from the library. It's just like I put it on this big beautiful monitor and it's literally this little box in the center screen. I'm like, what the heck is this?
It's fantastic. Yeah, the other funny thing is great. I go on the only other time that I've been on Facebook, I happen to see that you and this guy Ben are talking about me.
Oh yeah, that's one of our fans, Ben. Yeah,
He's like, imagine how Chuck's gonna freak out about like virtual reality avatar, and I was like, you guys talk about me?
Yeah, he's a big fan of ours. He's the only one who comments on our videos on YouTube, which I appreciate greatly. And he is the one who coined the term. Well, he didn't coin occasional Matt, but he did say occasionally Matt in a post when he was promoting us on his Facebook. And when he made the joke of like he said that it was like JP, Father Chuck, and occasionally Matt, and I told you about that post. And I go, what if we just called Matt occasional Matt? So like he's responsible for Matt's moniker.
See, I feel so weird because like anymore. I mean, we'll get into it because this is sort of related to what we're going to talk about, right? Because social media is really to blame for everything, and I like avoiding. I took all social media other than our Signal account off of my phone, so I don't have Messenger on my phone anymore. I don't have Instagram on my phone anymore. I don't have Facebook on my phone anymore. And those are the only things I have. You will never. I shouldn't say never, but you will probably never see me on that god awful TikTok.
Yeah.
It is a plague.
Well, you don't know. You're not a great dancer anyway, so I wouldn't really expect that.
You don't know. I will say I have a friend
that.
who's an Episcopal priest. He's much younger than me, and he does campus ministries in Texas. And that dude has TikTok down pat, like as a priest. Like he is doing incredible work using TikTok as like an outreach thing for people.
Nice.
And I look at him like that's his age. It's cool. I don't have to be there. He can do that.
Right. It scares me sometimes. Sometimes I feel like there are times where I'm like I'm really unhappy that we don't have like thousands of like subscribers and listeners and people commenting and stuff. But on the other hand, I feel like it would be so overwhelming. Because I've watched YouTube videos and listened to podcasts of people who do like okay in the realm of content creation. You know, they're better than us, but they're not like, you know, they're not up there. But they do all right. And even the ones who do all right are like, I have to get rid of my phone. All my faith in humanity is gone from all the crap people tell me, like just for saying innocuous stuff.
Yeah, it's like the articles coming out about like female game reviewers who gave Cyberpunk 2077 like a less than perfect review, and they're all being like threatened.
Yeah, that's been insane.
About a game that nobody has played yet.
A game that is, I'm hearing, sort of overrated. Brian Collins of former Birth Movies Death fame said that it's this year's No Man's Sky.
Yeah, I could see that because I mean I've watched videos about that about that game since what 2013. So they've been working on it for a really long time. And when you work on something that long and you're putting information in front of people about it all the time, it
Right.
really creates like a hype that you're never really going to be able to live up to.
And of course, with that kind of hype and having to live up to that means that you have to like create like horrible conditions for your workers to crunch, right? I read about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's like every video game these days. This is actually like this would be a good topic probably to have Father Fun back on, just to sort of talk about like the ethics and culture of video game making, right? Like all
Yeah.
the stuff that goes on behind the scenes with it and with the corporate culture and all that. And and the thing about like this whole thing, you want people to turn over their $60 to you, right? And so you've got to hype this thing and keep it in front of people. And all it does is it just creates these, I mean, just immense expectations. And then then it devolves into this weird, almost like sports team kind of mentality where because you've been following the development for so long and hyped it up in your head so much, you've sort of like Stockholm syndrome yourself into believing that this thing is perfect and awesome,
Yeah.
and it has to be. And so like even if it is, you don't want to face the idea that it could be like mediocre.
Because that means
And so,
all that effort was like it was like in vain, right?
right, right. Which happens to coincide with some other things that we're seeing in our world right now when lots of people hype something big and it doesn't turn out the way they wanted, and so now they burn cities.
Are you talking about Wonder Woman 1984 or? I'm
Yeah,
not really.
exactly.
I'm not quite.
Though I've heard that's actually very good. Everything I've seen says really good.
I haven't heard a thing actually, to be honest. But I am looking forward to it. Yeah. A lot's happened since we've been gone. I guess maybe we should kind of address. Hey, we're back.
Right. Well, let's see. What was
Sorry
our
about
last
that.
episode? What was our last episode?
Scream.
When was that?
It's Halloween.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. We took a week off because it's like, hey, the election's happening. We're just gonna take a little hiatus and let things kind of die down a little bit.
To be fair, the election just ended Monday.
Painfully true. There was a time when I think conspiracy theories were fun.
Mm-hmm.
It was something you kind of indulged because we didn't have found footage movies or ARGs or that kind of stuff, to where it's like you can escape from reality a little bit, maybe like warp your reality some, maybe make yourself believe for a minute that there might be a Bat Boy. Last 2013, a whole 2013s ago, we talked about the Galactic Federation of Light, which has been in the news recently. Gosh, I probably should have listened to that episode before we did, because I don't remember like how are we talking about aliens and stuff. We weren't really indulging, but we were kind of like, isn't this kind of fun and crazy and weird?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit more. I think we were more into like the culture of the alien, like the alien UFO people, right? Like the culture of it, because like that's
Right.
like
And then I did
not
a whole
necessarily,
bit where I was like, I might be joining a cult.
Yeah. Here's the thing: maybe they put those monoliths up everywhere.
That has to be it.
Like maybe this actually is, because I remember reading something that was like, oh well, the monolith was definitely built by people. Why do we assume that? Okay, like yeah, they might have faster than light speed travel, but they still got to use rivets.
The point is, there was a time when conspiracy theories was just kind of like a fun thing to do. I was just watching a clip from a movie the other day, made by Richard Linklater from Austin, Texas, who made movies like Dazed and Confused, the Before trilogy, School of Rock. He made a little independent film called A Scanner Darkly, which is sort of like a cel-shaded kind of conspiracy theory, kind of paranoid thriller movie with Keanu Reeves, Robert Downey Jr., Winona Ryder.
Isn't it based on a Philip K. Dick book?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a scene with Alex Jones standing on a street corner, like next to like a Burger King or something, yelling through a megaphone.
Look around you. Look how far we've come. Humanity wasn't meant to live like this. Our every waking moment, tracked and traced and scanned. It's time to stop submitting to this tyranny.
So he's doing his shtick on the megaphone. Keanu Reeves is just walking by, and a black van pulls up.
It's time to realize that we're being enslaved. Uh-oh, it's our tax dollars at work. Protect us from ourselves. Hey, guys, I used to be one of you. Stop selling out your own species.
And like guys dressed in black with guns like kidnap Alex Jones and they drive off with him. It's kind of funny. And like that's and I also remember around a few years later I was working at a cool little film festival in Dallas, and we actually tried to get Alex Jones in our festival just because we thought it would be funny. And
he was quirky, not dangerous.
Now though, I don't know if I can really capture like the magnitude of damage that conspiratorial thinking has done just within the past 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, you think about, right, the kind of person you're talking about, the kind of conspiracy thing that we're talking about here, like that when it was, you know, kind of like fun, is we're talking about like what the character of Dale from King of the Hill.
Yeah, yeah.
I sure hope my new driver's license finally shows up. I hear the new security holograms are outstanding. Maybe that's what's holding things up.
I'll tell you why your license is taking so long. The U.S. Postal Service is bogged down in the most elaborate PSYOPs campaign in history. First, they fatten us up with all those 2-for-1 pizza coupons. Then when we're too logy to put up a fight, they sell us off to the Red Cross, who removes our kidneys, which go back on the pizzas to start the process all over again.
Howdy, Hank. You got something from the Department of Public Safety.
My driver's license. We were just talking about that.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't forget you, Mr. Gribble.
How did you know my name?
Actually, we can trace this whole thing with a very particular, with one individual. And that individual is Randy Quaid.
Yeah.
So Randy Quaid in Independence Day,
Right.
you know, goofy guy, everybody sort of rolls their eyes at the fact that he believes in, you know, aliens. And then now we've got Randy Quaid today.
He became his character.
Kind of follows what's happened in our culture, right? Like it
Yes.
started with this sort of quirky, like, I'm not sure that I really believe they landed on the moon. And you're sort of like, okay, well, whatever. And then it turned into,
Well, there's like the 9/11 truth.
9/11 was an inside job. Like Loose Change came out, and everybody was like, including us. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, oh, I don't know, guys. This is actually kind of raising some interesting points and whatnot. And then you take it to the next level, and now it's like Infowars, and now it's all of this stuff that suddenly is like everything that you believe is not true, and it just sort of, instead of being this thing of like, maybe you don't, like you don't trust the government because they don't tell you all the truth. Okay, fine, whatever. They have secrets that we're not privy to. We sort of assume that for most of our lives. But now it's like, that becomes like your ontological identity. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're going to get into this, right? This whole idea that it goes beyond just like, oh, maybe they know some stuff that we don't know. One day maybe we'll find out something that we were a secret to. But now it becomes like, it's not only is it like we can't trust them, but we actually have to actively arm ourselves and try to overthrow them because they're not telling us everything or whatever. And even that, the verifiable facts are in front of you.
Right. Yeah.
And you're basically trying to shoot holes like in it, you know?
Yeah, and I wish we had the time to just like parse everything about conspiracy theory and the thinking behind and the psychology behind it, but we just don't have that kind of time.
Yeah, but we can. But I think we can. I think we can talk a little bit about ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because like I can talk about me and like how I spent seriously probably about 3 years totally buying the Loose Change narrative.
It's interesting you bring that because I did too for a little bit. But I am interested, Chucky. What is sort of your relationship with conspiracy theories and stuff? You say there was a time when you kind of bought into the Loose Change thing, and
well, I mean, I'm a kid who grew up watching Unsolved Mysteries. I grew up with the most terrifying theme song of all time. And then I've always been the one. I think I mentioned this back in the Galactic Federation episode, where whenever there were UFO documentary marathons on History Channel, like I'm gonna sit down and watch. Like I'm just a sucker for some guy's over the shoulder VHS cam photo of blurbs, blobs in the sky and just that kind of thing. And I'm a sucker for that. And I sort of always, I still to some degree want to believe that a UFO crash in Roswell, and that the government has kept it secret for various reasons. Maybe the aliens asked to be. They don't want everyone to know about us, right? Why does it have to be nefarious? Maybe the aliens are like, hey, bro, we want to be on the down low here. This was an accident. We just, but, so like, I do kind of in general believe that there might very well be alien life that has, I'll put it this way. Where I currently stand with it is if I found out that like all these UFO videos that are being filmed by like F-18 pilots and stuff, like if we find out that those are actually aliens, I won't be surprised, right? Like I just won't be surprised. That's the point where I'm at right now. But I'm not like but I'm also at the point of like, we'll probably find out that it's some sort of experimental aircraft or misidentified piece of space debris, and we're gonna be like, oh man,
because you have critical thinking skills and it's healthy to use them like that,
right? But yeah, but that's I like the thing with like Loose Change. I'll tell you, here's what happened with Loose Change. So I watched Loose Change. For those listeners who don't know what Loose Change is, it was this documentary. I've got quotes going up. That was made by a group of 20-year-olds. I found out the guy was like 21 when he made this thing. Yeah. Basically questioning the media narrative about 9/11, and I think raised some very interesting questions around about like why like the airplane did like things with the Pentagon and stuff like that. Just very interesting questions that I still think would be like I still don't know that we're getting the entire full story, but obviously, right, for national security, you're not going to get the full and entire story. Like that's just sort of what we understand with the Pentagon. But what this documentary was made to do was to say it was an inside job perpetuated by the Bush administration in order to. It seems like the conclusion that they came to was to steal gold, if I remember correctly, because there was like an armored car full of gold in like the lower level of like World Trade Center 7.
I don't remember.
And yeah, but I guess that's ultimately they really never gave like a point to it, other than maybe I guess to consolidate power. Oh no, that's right. I take it back. They used that Neocon magazine that said that what America needs is a new Pearl Harbor in order to sort of unify us as a country, right? We need this conflict in order to give us a common national identity,
right? And also to invade Iraq and take out the oil, right? Like that's
right. And that was part of it, but that was kind of more Michael Moore's thing. But But yeah, that documentary came out, and like I think good point. Let's compare it to Michael Moore real quick. Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11, I think did a really good job of showcasing how these private military contractors that were working within the government were looking for an excuse to like do what they need to do to make money, right? Like that's just like I think like you can see a very plausible thing right there of like maybe intelligence knows something's going to happen and we're going to let it happen because we can benefit from it, right?
Yeah, right.
Versus I'm actually going to perpetuate it against people, and not only that, I'm gonna hit the Pentagon, but I'm also going to I'm going to hit the Pentagon with some kind of weapon that I'm going to make it look like an airplane, and then I'm going to take down the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
But with a controlled explosion that I installed in the building the night before, right. And then I'm also going to like make an airplane vanish. And like all the passengers and stuff vanish, like they just didn't exist, like cart them off to a camp or something. I don't know. But it's like when you start sort of putting the whole thing together and to try to make it a cohesive narrative, you realize it falls apart because there's too many moving parts and there's no way that is a sustainable secret to keep. And so like right there at that point, again, critical thinking skills. Once I sort of put it all together, I was like, yeah, there's no way that this thing altogether could work. The idea of raising some questions about little things here and there being like, oh, okay, well, there's like the difference between like steel beams and steel reinforced concrete and all that kind of stuff. Like that's an interesting conversation where you can learn something out of it. And I think it was actually standing in line at the DMV where I was like, there's no way 9/11 could have happened because this is what the government looks like. Right? It's all bureaucracy and people like making like, really not good money.
Right. Yeah. And also when the big conspiracies are revealed, it's usually like smaller scale stuff.
Yeah.
That's like kind of gone out of control, and that's how we found out about it because it got out of control.
Well, like Watergate.
Yeah.
Right.
Watergate, or even like MK Ultra, like.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny that Watergate, they affix gate to every scandal, right? And like they treat Watergate as though it's like this big, like, what was it? They were just trying to get like a voting registry out of like the Democratic headquarters.
I think so.
Right?
Yeah.
It actually, when you look at what they were doing, it was fairly tame in comparison to what like we sort of hype up, these scandals to be. The fallout of Watergate was that people no longer trusted government, right? Like arguably opened up this space that we're talking about now, but it was such a, again, relatively minor thing compared to the other stuff that's going on now, that it's kind of almost quaint that we would take that as seriously as we did. Whereas now, it's like if whatever they did at Watergate found out, somebody would just be like, well, that's just how politics is.
So that's the extent of sort of your conspiratorial thinking. That's where it sort of ended.
Yeah, the extent of my conspiratorial thinking is, I'm sure that there are secrets out there. There are things out there that I don't know, and that's okay.
Right.
I don't think it's nefarious. I think I actually think if there are aliens and we find out the reason that the government didn't tell us, we're probably going to be like, that's the stupidest reason. Right. It's not going to be like, oh, we're actually partnering with them so we can eat children or anything like that. It's more like, well, yeah, they just crashed their ship in New Mexico. They were sort of embarrassed by it, and so they just asked us really nicely to just not.
Hey, just be cool, okay?
Just be cool. We made a mistake, guys.
I don't know that I ever got super into conspiracy stuff. I'm trying to think really hard if there was ever a time at my most conservative, if there was some kind of. I don't think there is, but there was a very brief moment, a hot minute, as the kids say. I watched the Zeitgeist documentary and Loose Change, and I think how I kind of snapped out of it was well, why aren't you doing anything about it? And it's they always had answers because we've become so pacified, we're just a bunch of sheeple, you know what I mean? And then I started kind of thinking kind of capitalist about it, because these were my more capitalist days, where I was like, I kind of feel like you're just doing this to make money. What if this is the conspiracy theory? You're just making this up so that I fall into this weird state, and then I have to come to you for more information, but then you're going to be like, oh no, that'll be $5, sir.
Hey, it's Facebook.
And it's yeah, exactly. And it's why are you doing that and not doing what every activist and revolutionary would do once they find out that the government's corrupt?
But aren't they kind of doing that now?
Well, yeah. Yeah, Pizzagate, the cars running into crowds, all that kind of stuff. Well, but even then, why is there not okay, it's I'm watching these YouTube videos that got millions of views and millions of comments of people saying this is real. I'm like, why is no one actually doing anything? And I think that was the unraveling for me, which is
so the point the point I think that you're trying to make is that means that on some level everyone realizes it's not real.
Yeah. That this is some way to pacify yourselves in some weird way.
Yeah, it's entertainment.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we may have cracked it, dude, because it's all about the lulls, right?
Right.
It's all about the lulls.
And it's also kind of goes hand in hand with because this started happening to me around the same time the South Park episode about 9/11 trutherism came out, where
we took a Duke in the urinal. Was
it that one? Because it's one I just imagine it was George W. Bush and his cabinet glorious money, yes.
Yes, yeah.
And then they execute the conspiracy theorist nerd, and then the kids see him the next day eating a hot dog, and the conspiracy theory is that it's a conspiracy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how it ends. Yeah, that's with Bush being like, oh, we thought you guys think we're lame, but now you think we're cool and scary.
Yeah.
It just turns out they're lame.
Right.
Well, that's what I told you. Okay, so let's get to what we're really going to get here, which is this idea that it becomes a religion, right? And that it is in fact rooted in this cult around the outgoing president of the United States. And it's right there was a great point that was made on SNL recently where they showed a clip where he was talking where Trump was talking about this being, the election was stolen from him. And it was this corruption. It's corruption at the highest levels of government, he says. Mm-hmm. Corruption at the highest levels of government. I think it was Colin Jost who goes, you are the highest level of government. This whole notion that he's fighting some kind of fight.
Right. Well, and we're talking specifically, you're talking specifically about QAnon, which
Not
is
necessarily just QAnon.
Well, because QAnon is based around the idea that Trump is in a forever war with a behind the scenes cabal of child eaters made up of Democrats, globalists, For those of you who don't know what a globalist is, we used to call them world bankers. And before they called them world bankers, they called them Jews.
The Jews.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You gotta have the article on there.
Right. But what I'm getting at is that that's the idea of QAnon, is that he's fighting the globalists behind the scenes, and that he's letting go. He's also releasing messages into the ether of that shows sort of the evidence that he is that the storm is coming, and the storm is basically all these people are one day are going. There's going to be like a mass arrest. Mm-hmm. That's when Hillary finally goes to jail, right?
Being that it's Advent in the Christian calendar right now, at my church I'm doing a series. Advent is both rooted in looking toward the time when Jesus was born, but also looking forward to the time of his return. So there's an apocalyptic element to Advent, and like proper Christian apocalypse, not this premillennial dispensationalist version of apocalypse that's sort of invented,
which is like Left Behind stuff. Like,
yeah. But like, so I mentioned that because I'm just sort of mired in a bunch of apocalyptic stuff right now, and I just before I started recording, I was finishing up my study for my online class this today on the apocalypses that Jesus gives in the Gospels, and because he gives in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, he gives apocalypses, and basically what you just described about this idea that the storm is coming and that whole thing, like that's an apocalyptic notion. Right, that here's this event that's going to happen, and then all the truth is going to be laid out, right? And that's like, it's the final judgment, right? These people are going to receive their judgment and then their punishment, right? It's an apocalyptic statement, and so that gets into where what really inspired us to talk about this is that this is now actually a religion.
Definitely, and I think a lot of people are. I mean, if you look at some of the symbolism that this particular conspiracy theory uses, they use words like the Great Awakening. Mm-hmm. The storm, and also there's a kind of motto, don't worry, trust the plan,
right?
Which just means like you just have to watch, you just have to sit back and watch everything unfold.
Which is what Jesus says in the Gospels, where he was like, oh, if someone says I'm the Christ, or someone says, oh, the Christ is over there, don't listen to them, because that false Christs have to come before I return. Rather, take the lesson from the fig tree. When it's leaves are in the when the leaves are on the branches, and spring is near. So keep watch, keep watch. Right. So again, it piggybacks on this religious thinking that's common in a lot of places. Mm-hmm.
And it's really kind of sucking in the evangelicals, right? Like hook, line, and sinker. Anyone who sort of identified as even kind of like vaguely Christian on the right has been really pulled in by this, and it's echoed throughout not just these sort of online circles, but also in more serious media outlets, Fox News, even CNN sometimes. I don't have any verifiable information, but I know that there are now politicians who are QAnon believers who are now in Congress, right? And even Trump retweets lots of stuff that originate in Q, and the way these things kind of reverberate. They don't all come from Q, I guess, but it's just created a culture of conspiracism.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing: is I don't think it created it though. It's piggybacked off of something that was already there. Like it's working on momentum, right?
That's
because
true,
because I mean, I think you can draw a pretty straight line between, between moon landing denialism to
climate change
Kennedy Kennedy assassination conspiracies, moon landing denialism, which are closely close to each other, to 9/11 denialism. Mm-hmm. Birtherism was part of it.
That's true, right? Yeah.
But what it all comes down to is that you've got certain people that buy it, and then it becomes sort of a pop culture acceptance, and then you've got somebody who's able to capitalize it and bring more people in with it, and it creates a snowballing effect, like you're talking about now, where you can just sort of get roped into it if you had nothing to do with it, because you said some certain phrase, and now somebody has memed you, and now you've been co-opted by their movement.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's crazy to see how it becomes so normalized. Tucker Carlson did a whole segment on George Soros,
right?
Which I'm like, well, first of all, that's probably just because he's trying to get his audience back. But seeing things like that, and then just seeing like the whole like I try not to watch TV news because I find it like just exhausting. But I actually followed pretty heavily these lawsuits. And let me tell you something, man. You want to talk about like normalizing conspiracy theories? It was actually quite bizarre to see someone stand like in a pulpit in front of an audience on live television, say things that they believed that sound like really outlandish, and then read official documents of them saying the exact opposite the very next day in court. And you could show both of these things to somebody who might be a supporter of a kind, and it's just whatever.
Right. Oh, they're playing the game. You know, they got to do what they got to do.
Yeah. This is like what it's come to. This is what it's created. That we can now clearly see the seam. We can now clearly see the cracks, but it doesn't matter.
Right. Which gets into the cognitive dissonance piece that, you know, that people in cults experience.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like I think about you got to think about Harold Camping, right? I got a little personal relationship with, you know, little relation with Harold Camping. If you remember him, he was the guy who said the world was going to end on May 21st, 2011. Right. Which happened to be my wedding day.
Yeah.
that's why I say I have a personal relation with little Harold.
Which you had in Washington, D.C., that was fun. That was a fun trip for me, that I got to witness both your wedding and the rapture. It was amazing.
Right. And yeah, like it was supposed to have this, and then it didn't happen.
I mean, we haven't heard of him since then, Chuck. You know,
well, he died.
Oh, well.
He was old. He's like 90-something years old. He died. But he did predict again after that. And people just sort of like, okay. And they just went with him. Yeah. Like, you know, this kind of stuff happens. So there's an element to, and if you read through, like, because I read all this apocalyptic stuff all the time anyway, if you look through the history of like doomsday prophets and all of that, like that's been a part of American culture since its beginning, and even before. I mean, it goes back to Europe and stuff before even anyone came over, any white people came over here. But it's, so I think that what we're experiencing now is just the new version of something that's been around for a really long time. Mm-hmm. You know, which is that idea of, well, here's the thing they don't want to tell you. Right. And I told you, I see a connection with this between the rise in Gnosticism that was super popular toward the end of the Roman Empire. And I think that makes me wonder if this is sort of like a necessary component of the ends of empires. You know, because Gnosticism exists in a very, you know, we people are sort of familiar with, you know, so-called Christian Gnosticism, but there was various types of Gnosticism, and Gnosticism was we're part of these mystery cults that were predicated in this idea that here's this particular kind of obscure religion, but the sort of public face of it is not the real version. There's this other version behind it, and that's the true version. Right. And within Christian Gnosticism, it plays off really strongly with like elements you see in the Gospel of Mark, right? Because Mark has this famous thing called the Markan secret, where, you know, Jesus sort of leaves like the wider audience in the dark, and then he pulls his disciples aside and is like, well, here's what's really going on. And so like they build off this and say like, oh, then that means that, you know, maybe Jesus had even more secrets that he told to individual disciples. And so like then you get like Gospel of Thomas or Gospel of Judas and all these things that exist out in that time period, you know, late 2nd century, early 3rd century, claiming that they have the real teachings and the real ideas.
Right.
And that to me sounds a lot like what we've got going on here, right? Because Gnosticism was also apocalyptic, right? You know, and that makes sense because the Roman Empire was literally falling apart around them. They saw, you know, the Visigoths and others beginning their moves to like sack the cities and you know, everything's collapsing under its own weight. And so like, you know, they're trying to make sense of this world, and rather than look at it as either the, you know, this is the coming home to roost of abuses and things happening, when you sort of see your identity as the center of the universe and the ones who brought, you know, enlightenment to the world. So when you see yourself as like the people who brought enlightenment and technology and advancement to the world, right? And then now suddenly, like the people that are outside your empire who actively rejected it are now able to destroy it. Like, you look at it as like there's something else going on. It can't just be mundane result of, decadent leadership and bureaucracy. It's got to have this deeper meaning. There's got to be this deeper thing going on behind the scenes. And so like, and then it gets like almost like that sports fanaticism mindset of like, this is my team and I've got to hold on to them and I've got to believe in them more than just like, oh, I prefer what they're saying. It's got to have substance, of a sort of cosmic significance, right? And so like that's what we're seeing right now, we talk about Trump, right, as the figure in this, but you could put anyone in that place. It doesn't.
Yeah, he just entertained it so much. So much of it was like fed into his ego.
Well, it's like I was telling, like I was kind of talking to you a little bit way back when, and this got me kind of thinking about it when I first brought up Trump, which is this idea, like going back to the George Bush thing, right, from South Park, where he's pointing out like, oh, we're actually boring and we want you to think that we're way like cooler and scarier than we really are. Right. See, what I think happened is I think Trump played off of this conspiratorial element, and by him playing off it, he gave it some legitimacy so that people who normally dismiss it are like, oh, maybe there's something to this. And then what happened was he won and he got to be president. And then he learned a very valuable lesson about the presidency, which is that it is absolutely incredibly boring because it is just nothing but board meetings.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I've been an administrator. I know what administration is like. It's boring. You're sitting in meetings all the time. Like, I've got family members who work for government, and I know what they do. And it's all meetings. It's all they do is sit in meetings. You're not fighting shadowy evil people, and you're not wielding, like, you don't have like the decadence of like, empires and all this kind of stuff like he really wanted, right? It's boring, and that explains why he's not doing it. Like why he delegated off all these responsibilities, underlings and stuff, because it's boring and he doesn't want to do it. And it makes sense because nobody wants to do it. That's why it's a dedicated thing for the people who want to do it. Like they make it their career ambitions to do it because they want to sit in board meetings. But so, and so what I think is what he found out is that politics, like the daily running of the government, is actually is not sexy, is not tantalizing, it's boring. And so now this whole other piece, like he's got to keep playing it up and giving the appearance of like, yeah, this is what's going on here, like, yeah, we're really fighting this shadowy villains behind the scenes, and I'm fighting for you to do blah 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 blah, because it makes it sound way more exciting than it really is.
That's why he did all those rallies, right? Like that's more exciting to him than a board meeting.
It's totally more exciting than a board meeting.
Yeah.
Like objectively true. Campaigning is the fun part of the presidency.
Yeah.
It's not it's not the actual, if there's anything that's been proven throughout all this is that he doesn't want to do the actual work. Like take away all this other stuff, right? And I'm not trying to get too much into politics in the sense of like, where it's about the sort of external aspects of political partisanship. I'm talking about like the actual, like just nuts and bolts work of governance. And it's clear that he doesn't want to do that,
right?
Because, like, this is the thing that sort of boggled me in this whole election thing is he's touting these conspiracies against himself and like really feeding up this idea of the conspiracy, but at the same time he's not, like, you look at his schedule and he does nothing. So it's like, why do you want this? You're not doing it now. Like you have the job now and you're not doing it. Ultimately, what this gets into is this whole idea that it becomes this personality thing, and it's revolving around this particular personality. And so now, like, I mean, the rally is a church service, right? It's got a litany, it's got a liturgy. I mean, he treats it more like a sort of like a comedian on tour, a speaking tour, right? He's got his greatest hits that he puts out. It's like a concert. But for the true believer types, it's more than just that, right? It's more than just adulation and praise. It's sacramental.
Yeah.
And the tweet. Oh my gosh, they love the tweet.
Oh my gosh,
that's receiving the sacrament too, right?
Yeah.
And it's just very fascinating.
Well, I wanted to ask you because I had an interesting thought while reading the article that you sent me, which is I should probably link that in the comments because it's a really good read.
Well, we haven't really talked about the fact that this is what we're actually talking about is the way that this whole QAnon thing has leached its way into the Roman Catholic Church.
Right. Yeah. And it's well, well. I mean, I guess it just makes sense if it leaked its way into evangelicalism. It's going to find itself in every other institution, right? I can only imagine if it's like found its way into the military, right? I don't know if it has or not, but
I'm sure some have,
but yeah, I mean, the article you sent me that I read that kind of spearheaded this topic is we're talking about how it's leaked into the Catholic Church, and there are figureheads. Today, I learned about V drops, which is interesting. What's that guy's name? Vegano?
yeah, something like that.
So like Catholics kind of have their own Q now too.
Well, can we really quickly just point out the irony of something?
Yeah.
With QAnon, right? Because QAnon's whole thing, right, is that there are Satan worshiping pedophiles who eat children. That's what's going on. So we have the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Kind of famously has a problem with one of those things.
Right.
But these people are actually in support of the more traditional systems of the church that have enabled and celebrated, enabled that kind of behavior to go on.
You know, it's
are you for real right now?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy, but you know what's interesting? It kind of reminds me of what's interesting is that these sort of Q followers or V followers, whatever, they actually bring that up a lot. That Pope Francis is sort of facilitating the further exploitation of children and sexual abuse and covering it up and stuff. It reminds me of how like Trump weaponized the Iraq War, of being like anti-Iraq war, right? Like that was the big screw up of the Bush administration, and it was very Republican to be very pro-war. Well, now this new administration is like very anti-war, supposedly, right?
Right, but with all their armed militia people running around, yeah,
exactly. So it just reminds me of that, how they're sort of weaponizing that against Pope Francis, sort of the same way that Trump has sort of weaponized the anti-Iraq war rhetoric.
Right. Well, right, and Pope Francis is the Roman Catholic Church's Obama. Right, in the sense that here is somebody who's not part of the normal mold, right? Which means he's brown. He's a brown man.
Yeah.
And
he cares about the poors. What?
Yeah. Oh my God, he's willing to let gay people be openly in relationship.
Right.
He doesn't. He thinks that maybe abortion isn't the absolute worst sin.
Right.
There are bigger issues out there. Yeah, it's sort of amazing to me, right? Like all of this but and then terrifying, right? Because it becomes this whole it goes even beyond like the anti-popes thing of like Avignon back in the the 1600s or whatever, when there were the three popes and there was that crisis within the papacy around who was really the pope.
I have no idea, dude. I'm not aware of this.
Sorry. Yeah, these are just like the random things I know in my head, but it's the idea that like, as we see in it, that someone like Donald Trump, who is in no way, shape, or form Catholic,
right? Yeah,
is somehow more Catholic than Pope Francis.
Yeah,
that's weird.
Right, but again, it's feeding into his ego, because that guy that this article was talking about, this Vegano guy, was like writing him letters, right? Writing Trump letters, telling him he's like the greatest ally to Catholicism. Of course he's going to be like, yeah, this is a great letter, guys. Like, I am the best thing to happen to the Catholic Church. That's what he said, right? He's like, I'm the best president in the Catholic Church's history, or something.
Right. John F. Kennedy.
Yeah.
It's this mentality around, really what it comes down to is it's about the gods of your own choosing, right? And that's where this idea of idolatry comes into play, where it's not about conforming yourself to a set of beliefs and practices that challenge you on a daily basis as an individual. It's about embracing and following something that allows you to feel really good about yourself constantly.
Exactly. And that's what I really want to get to, because
Yeah.
I asked you if this sort of conspiratorial thinking, I don't know if it's from like a secular point of view. I can only comment it from like a Christian point of view. Is it as if for a Christian to take, or any religious person, I guess, to take part in this sort of conspiratorial thinking, is that a form of idolatry?
Well, so here I'll tell you when I hear the phrase idolatry, here's what I think of. Okay.
All right.
So there's an article from Relevant magazine way back in the day. I can't remember what the author was, but she made a comment. She was Jewish, who had converted to Christianity, and she talked about how her Judaism and her Christianity were really, her Judaism really helped her with her Christianity, and she draws on both very deeply in her life, and it means a lot to her, and it's helped, her, the fact that she comes from a Semitic upbringing helps her understand the scriptures and all this kind of stuff. But she was talking about how in the Semitic mind, the greatest of all sins is idolatry, right? And you look at the 10 Commandments, right? That's the first sort of commandment, right? It's like, you have no other gods but me. You shouldn't make any other gods, right? So like it's all rooted in idolatry. But then she points out within the Christian tradition, particularly the Western Christian tradition, rooted in the teachings of St. Augustine of Hippo, Augustine says that the chief of all sins is pride. Well, she made this point of saying that pride and idolatry are actually the same thing. It's just that pride is making yourself the idol. And what I love about this interpretation is, fast forward a few years after I read this article, and I'm sitting in I'm in seminary, and I'm sitting in a class with Rabbi Jack Moline, who is a conservative rabbi, formerly in D.C., now in the Chicago area, and he was teaching classes on Judaism, and he tells us about how Jews understand the Garden of Eden story. And how the Garden of Eden story is not about Satan showing up in the form of a snake and tempting Eve. That is, in fact, the snake's just a snake. And the snake, because he's a snake and not a human, has never had the prohibition on eating the fruit. Only humans have been given the prohibition of eating the fruit. The snake is allowed to eat the fruit. And so when the snake talks to Eve, basically his whole approach to it is like, hey, this thing's no big deal. Well, I don't know why you guys can't eat it. Like, it's no big deal. Like, you're not going to die. I haven't died. You're not going to die. And so because they have this conversation, Eve looks at it and she's like, oh, yeah, okay, I mean, it's a pretty good point. And so she chooses to eat the fruit, and then she gives it to Adam. That what Rabbi Moline says is that in Judaism, then what happens there is the first act of idolatry, because they choose to listen to the words of the serpent rather than the words of God. And therefore they put the serpent at a place equal to or above God, And so, and then you can see how that feeds into the pride piece, because it gives them what they want. Right? God wasn't giving them what they want. By the way, Rabbi Moline says that within Judaism and Eastern Christians also affirm this idea that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was something that God had always intended for humanity to eat from at some point. He wanted them to grow up and mature to a place to where they were able to handle it. The real problem is that they ate it ahead of time. But what I ultimately see within evangelicals that have gravitated to this sort of stuff that we're talking about here is that it becomes a thing of expedience. They're not getting what they want from Jesus as Jesus is presented. Yeah. And so they've, and then for decades, they've tried to foster a Jesus that affirms that worldview, but it hasn't really worked out. And so now they're actually just looking for a completely different savior. But they can't just outright embrace that. They have to still give it the Christian language in order to justify that move, right? So now they talk about this figure that is the polar opposite of, it basically sort of represents everything that Jerry Falwell railed against back in the 80s. And now they embrace him. And they justify it so many times, right? Like, oh, he's like Cyrus. He's going to send us back home, right? Like he's an ally, inspired by God and all this kind of stuff. So they use this biblical justification in order to be able to do it. But it's gradually being whittled away more and more and more to where now it's becoming sort of not a-religious, but it's like they no longer feel the need to have to kind of dress it up in Christian language. Yeah. It's, this is just, it now is its own thing. And therefore they have chosen another God.
Right. Cornel West said that idolatry leads to a spiritual poverty. Mm-hmm. And the thing about that is that, like, when you worship an idol, like I'm kind of being sort of, metaphorical here. When you put something at the center that's not God or representative of like love and justice, peace, restoration, things like that, and it's mostly just yourself, you are kind of participating in a sort of spiritual poverty. You're cutting yourself off, not just from the divine, but from people around you. Mm-hmm. Because spirituality itself is a connectedness. You're connected to the divine, and you're also connected to the people, your humanity.
Right. Well, and if you're God, nobody else can be God. So
exactly. So by participating in this idolatry, by expending this spirituality into nothingness, you're robbing yourself of that connectivity. And when you're doing that, you're making yourself more isolated, more alienated. When that happens, that's when it becomes about self-preservation. I see conspiratorial thinking as a way to be like, I'm just going to get mine.
Well, and this actually ties into the conversation we had around pocket preppers.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, preppers who they're hoarding all this stuff for themselves after the post-apocalypse, not for their community, not for anyone but me and mine. Yeah, right. and that's to me that is a sign of spiritual poverty. I don't see a spirituality in this mindset that people are putting themselves in. I just see a way of like trying to just like survive, and that kind of bakes into our old American tradition of individualism, which is not inherently bad. I try to stress as much as possible because I don't want to be lectured individualism. I get it, but it's just so hammered into our culture that it becomes like you have to sell out to that sort of mindset.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you were saying. I mean, I haven't thought about it before, but like the idea of spiritual poverty, I never thought about this idea that the opposite of that would be spiritual abundance, and that when you define your life according to abundance, you don't feel the need to hoard.
Right.
You don't feel the need to. You don't have to worry about yourself because you feel there's abundance. There's plenty to go around. Right. That's interesting. And that kind of fits in with like what Jesus says about this, blessed are the poor in spirit, right? Yeah. Blessed are the spiritually poor,
right?
Because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. But that's a kind of a different thing, because it's not like poor in spirit in that case is actually more along the lines of like you're devastated, like blessed are the devastated. Mm-hmm. Because once you hit that point of devastation, like the kingdom of God is yours. Like once you have nothing else, once everything else has been taken away from you, that's because all of the other idols have been stripped away, and now you are open to receive the thing that God is giving you. This is the thing that I've been thinking about, JP, for pretty much ever since I went to seminary, ever since I became Episcopalian. I've been really, or before that really, because I started to see this in my church growing up. I grew up in a church that a lot of people had sort of put a lot of faith in the pastor, and his personality dictated everything. And so I started to realize that, and I certainly became very suspicious of cults of personality.
Right.
And I had a hard time going to church for a really long time because, everyone, you talk about the church and they'd be like, oh, I just love our pastor. I love our pastor. And like, well, that's always bothersome to me. It's one thing when you sort of like, I love my pastor as well. I love him, but like I go to the church because of all these other things. Right. But like there are people who just go to church because of the pastor. And, like I said, it's always kind of troubling to me. But like this whole conversation around idolatry has become a thing for me just constantly since those times of trying to think about how often what my proclivities are toward choosing a God that works for me, mm-hmm. rather than the challenge of conforming my life to what this God may want for me. Right? Because on one hand, there's the first piece of it is that who am I to assume that if I'm made, right, if I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, to use the King James, then it would mean that I have sort of like there's a design to the kind of person that I am. There's an intention around the kind of person that I'm supposed to be. And if I'm not willing to sort of listen and discern someone giving me guidance on what that person is, which you can only find really through friendship and community and family, right? Because God speaks to those people. Mm-hmm. If I don't do that, then I'm basically, trying to write my own existence.
Exactly. By doing that, I think it's just a more wise thing to do.
Yeah.
And wisdom in terms of, community, family, it allows you, a wise person knows how to like improvise. They have that courage to be vulnerable and to be pliable. And it's like, it's okay to be wrong sometimes.
Right.
Like it's right to be wrong. We'll catch it on the next note, as Cornel West put it in his jazz metaphors, which I listened to a lot of jazz this week, by the way.
Good for you.
And it's not a hipster thing, okay? They're black artists. I'm supporting black voices.
Hey, man, the thing is it's the most American form of music, right?
Exactly. Totally, dude.
I've got this whole thing about like, I've been for a long time wanting to write this book on like on Episcopal Church, the Episcopal Church as being sort of like the vessel of American spirituality, and talking about American spirituality and how American spirituality is expressed through things like jazz.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's and I think that kind of ties into what we're talking about, though, right? Like that kind of spirituality. Like if spirituality is a connectedness, then you have to, like I said, you have to have that courage to be pliable with your community, and to be and not be afraid of being wrong. When I think of conspiratorial thinking, I think of like a rigidness.
Well, the sort of the way I think about this is a metaphor that came to mind recently, and I've used this in sermons recently, is somewhere along the way we forgot that Christianity was meant to be a way and not a war. Right? Yeah. When we think of it as a war, wars have to be won. There has to be victors. There has to be someone who's defeated. So that means when something new happens, you have to treat it as suspicion, because it could be an insurgent. It could be, it's a threat.
Right.
New things are threats when you focus yourself on a war mentality. But when you think of it as a way, right? That's hiking. That's what Jesus is basically saying. When Jesus says, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life," he's like, "I'm the path you hike." That's what he's saying. Like, I'm the path that you hike that leads to God. Like, that's what Jesus is saying when he makes that statement. It's not like we've misinterpreted over the thing. It'd be like he's not making a statement about right or wrong. Like, he's not saying like either you follow me, you go to hell. Like, what he's saying is like, oh, you want to get to God? Well, follow me, I'll show you. Like, that's what he's saying.
Right.
Invitational. And so but anyway, that idea of like you're walking a path, you're hiking a trail, right? So when you think of it and you conceive of it as hiking, you have to be nimble and pliable, because a new thing that comes, you got a choice. You either got to go around it, or you got to learn to work with it, or in some cases, maybe in order for the path to go forward, you have to hack at it until it goes away. But you learn to adapt. So like, right? So gay marriage shows up, and now you're like, oh my God. If it's a war, it's an enemy. We gotta put them in their place. They can't be anywhere in here.
Right.
But if you're walking away, you're like, if you're walking a path, you're like, oh, okay. Here's this new thing. All right. Well, what do they want? Oh, well, they want marriage. Well, we already have marriage. Can what they do be incorporated into what we already understand? Oh, it can. Okay, we can work with that, and we just bring it along with us rather than try to like stamp it out. Jazz is a beautiful example of good American spirituality, in the sense that it takes what has already been around, but offers it from a different perspective, right? So like it's this beautiful combination of, all right, Europeans stole black people and forced them into this paradigm of European life or whatever, and then they're freed. And what do? Well, they take the European instruments that were forced on them and the European clothing that was forced on them, but they give a little twist. Right. And it becomes, and you say it becomes pliable. It becomes improvisational. It becomes, more fluid rather than rigid. And how do people respond? Oh, it's decadence. Oh, they're breaking the rules. Oh, they're whatever. Right. But that's war mentality. Right. Way mentality is more the jazz thing. Like, oh, well, we can play with this. We can do new stuff with it. We can incorporate it. Right. Now we see that, jazz is considered, on par with classical music in its level of respect.
And, the way things are kind of going just with like our own media, where there's like if you watch CNN or Fox News or whatever, how often is there like a breaking report, right? So it's like now you've kind of fostered a knee-jerk reaction to every new thing that happens. Like you have to have an instant opinion about it. You have to have an instant thought about it. It's not just like, it's one of the reasons why I stopped watching it. because I've sort of developed this thing where it's like if something new comes up, I don't feel like I have to have a knee jerk reaction to it. I just kind of like either ignore it and just kind of wait to see what happens, or like, oh, I'll think about it.
Well, can I at least? It makes me thinking that, and it gets me thinking about, since I've not really been participating in social media on a regular basis for 5 or 6 weeks now,
Right.
or more, I realized I feel more confident in my own opinions and thoughts.
Interesting.
Because I feel like I was so conditioned to like think I could watch a movie, and what was the first thing I wanted to do? I wanted to go on Birth Movies Death and read the review, because I want to see what other people thought about it, because that like sort of helped me understand like how I'm supposed to think about it. But I want to think about it rightly rather than wrongly or whatever. Right. But now, like, I can watch a movie or participate in something, and I have my thoughts and my opinions, and I'm like, I don't feel the need to have to share that, but like, this is how I feel about it, and that's like, okay, and move on, right? Like, maybe I'll journal it if I want to like get it down somewhere to kind of help crystallize it.
Right.
But I wonder, going back to the conspiracy thing, right? Because this is an online social media movement, how much of it is rated on this idea of people who are like somewhat insecure in their own convictions and beliefs, and so now, but they're also of an entire generation that have grown up thinking that all of their thinking has to be done through comment sections.
That too.
And and so what that does to people in terms of their attitudes.
Yeah, there's that, and there's also an added aspect of media literacy. I remember, friend of the podcast, Amanda, who came on to talk about her short film.
We need her back on, by the way.
Yeah, she's wonderful. She when Stella Emanuel had her little press conference, she noted, like, look at their lab coats, like they've never worn those before. You could see all like the folded creases in them and stuff, and even the microphones, like, they don't belong to any news station. They're just microphones standing there.
Yeah.
So it's like they're taking advantage that like people who kind of believe this stuff don't know how to differentiate between like something like that and like a Fox News press release or something. It's like as long as they have like the usual things that kind of make it sort of vaguely resemble something, it's like, oh, this is official news. I can believe every word that comes out of it. So there's a literacy involved as well. And part of it, but I do want to talk about the faith aspect of it, though, because I do think that so much of it comes from fear. That is, I think, comes from just I'm hesitant to say like a lack of faith, because I don't want to make people feel like this happens to you because you have no faith. But at the same time, like, maybe, I don't know, there are important conversations about like what's happening, and also bad faith.
Jesus has taken a while to get back.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the thing about this Christian's kind of, or evolution of apocalypticism in the Christian faith, was this idea that, Jesus is like, I'm coming back. And the first Christians were like, all right, well, so it'll happen. And then they start dying, and they're like, oh, it's not happening within our lifetime. It's going to be a while. And so then as it got longer and longer, Christians started to interpret, these ideas a little bit more vaguely, and to say that, it'll happen someday, right? We don't know when, but it'll happen someday, right? And so we have to live our lives so it could happen any minute. Like, that's really where the impetus is. And, after a while, right, like, there's a certain impatient personality that's like, I don't want to wait for that. I don't want to wait for the final judgment. I kind of want to make it happen. And so now I'm going to participate in something, right? So that gets to the kind of thing you're talking about, faith, right? Because faith, right, is the book of Hebrews says, is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, right? And that's frustrating and vague, because you want to see it, you want to put your hands on it, you don't want it to, you want something concrete, right?
Right.
And the eschaton, the return of Jesus, right now, not concrete. It's someday. It's not concrete. But watching Democrats get like punished because you disagree with them, that's concrete.
Yeah,
that's part of it too. But like I think we're definitely looking at something that is, and we're not the first to observe this, but there's something that very much has taken on the character of religious theological thinking.
Definitely.
Because I don't know if spirituality is the right word, but theology is definitely a word for this.
Dogmatism.
And dogmatism, right? Yeah. Oh, and that's the other thing. Dogmatism, right? That's been a problem in the church for a long time too. And dogmatism is, again, it's rooted in that idea of being right and winning, right? I mean, you think about, Copernicus, it doesn't orbit around us. We actually orbit around the sun.
Right.
But that war mentality, that imperialistic war mentality of the church is not willing to accommodate that.
Right.
And, but others could look at that and be like, huh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah. And what's funny, gosh, I didn't tell you about, like how there are still geocentrists out there.
Well, there's flat earthers.
Yeah, flat earthers and geocentrists still kind of exist, and they're all kind
Which
of
is all part of this too, right?
Yeah, it is. I feel so like alarmist when I say it, but I still feel like I think it's happening. I think this election has torn off a very large piece of the Republican Party, and just sort of the lockstep nature of the conservative wing of our politics, I think is going to become more splintered because of this and because of Trump. The more religious side, whether it's Catholicism, evangelicalism, any other denomination, I think they're going to see that their usefulness has worn out, and vice versa, even perhaps. And to make up for that sort of spiritual side will be this sort of conspiratorial thinking.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a much more rabid section of the party, a scarier one. So basically the future, it's going to be a lot of fun, folks. We just got to submit another application to the Galactic Federation, and I'll put in a good word for you guys.
That's right, because you're buddies with them.
Yeah. They rejected my application. But you know what? It's all about getting the foot in the door, right? They know who I am now. Seeing my face.
They recognize the face.
Yeah, it's all about that FaceTime.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's an interesting conversation to have. Obviously, we have no solutions.
Yeah.
Other than
listen to the podcast; they'll be fine.
How I got out of being so taken by conspiratorial thinking was asking the sorts of questions around what is this accomplishing? What is the goal? Is it tenable? Right? Like, could it even work mechanically? Like all of that. And I think these are the important things that we all have to ask ourselves regularly. We have to take that self-examination piece. Give it the sniff test. Does it even make sense? Is it grounded in reality? I would say identify your sacred cows. Mm-hmm. If you have a sacred cow, you kind of need to really kind of like poke at that cow a little bit. Yeah. And find out why it's a sacred cow. And, if someone comes along and manages to kill that sacred cow, what would happen? Mm-hmm. There's a great book called Body Piercing Saved My Life. It's a book that every time I've lent out to somebody, they've stolen it. But it's about the history of Christian rock by a non-Christian. And he has this great bit where he interviews David Bazan of Pedro the Lion. This guy who has a very complicated relationship with evangelical Christianity. And he was at this contemporary Christian music conference many, many years ago, early 2000s. He told this group of seminary students, that scholars are like pretty much split on whether or not King David even existed. And these seminary students were like, their hackles got raised. And they were like, well, then why would the Bible include him? Right. Like, if he didn't exist, isn't it all a lie? Doesn't the whole thing fall apart? And he said, well, that's the question you have to ask yourself. If King David didn't exist, does that affect your faith? Does that affect? And I think like that's the kind of stuff that we have to be willing to really ask those tough questions of our beliefs, right? What if the election actually was not stolen? What if, after multiple manual recounts that proved that the Dominion voting systems machines were not spitting out false positives for Biden or whatever, like, what if the actual media narrative that has been presented to us about it is actually true? Yeah. What if? How does that make you feel, right? Those are the kinds of things I think you have to ask. And I'm directing this to any person who stumbles upon this episode. I would be willing to bet if you're a QAnon true believer, you probably already turned off the podcast.
Or you're already on your way to my house.
Yeah, hard to get to my house though.
Yeah.
But if you're still listening, then you're asking questions. I'm willing to bet somewhere in the back of your mind you're asking questions. And it may be months from now that you come to a different conclusion, but you'll be okay. The world will not end. It turns out a lot of it is way more boring.
Yeah.
Than we really want it to be. We don't need all this stuff in order for the world to be exciting.
It's just a very lazy attempt at trying to make voting more exciting than paying your bills.
Yep.
Or doing jury duty. Why can't we sensationalize that?
Oh, I will go on about jury duty. Okay, let's take it right now. Compulsory. Well, two things. Compulsory service is not a marker of a free society. I'm going to say that right now on the record. The other one is that studies have shown that the American jury selection process is inherently unjust.
Yeah.
Because most people just sort of defer to whoever they think is the smartest person in the room.
I buy it.
And like every time I've ever like been asked to serve on jury duty, like luckily they tend to not make me serve on juries because nobody wants a priest, and it's really hard. And I'm up front. I can't be unbiased. Not that anybody can be unbiased. It's another philosophical problem with jury duty. But I've looked around the room at the people that are serving the jury, and I'm like, golly, like I don't want the dude who pulls like evening shifts at the subway to be the person who determines whether or not I go to jail. Like, no offense to the guy, but like.
Yeah.
Like,
well, there's a lot of manipulation going on there, man. That's you can talk to Matt about that.
Australia has it figured out. Australia has it figured out in a lot of ways, actually. What is it? Their prime minister election cycle is only allowed to be like 6 weeks tops, and they can only spend like no more than like $100,000 or something on campaigning.
Oh yeah.
And then their judicial process involves every trial is a judge-based trial, but you have 2 independent judges that independently review the case, and every verdict is automatically appealable.
Listen, I don't have to take this anti-American, railing against our system of government, which is all on a foundation of Christ. I don't have to.
Yeah. That was that, and this is the other.
And maybe if we allowed the 10 Commandments in courtrooms, Chuck, like there wouldn't be so much corruption. You ever think about that? Probably.
Yeah, I mean, as a Christian, here's the other thing. This is the thing I preach a lot. Your allegiance is to Jesus. Christ is no respect. Christ does not fly any flag. The church building is the embassy of heaven. It's not a place for nationalistic displays.
Right.
We are citizens of a kingdom that is not of this world. And if you call yourself Christian, the sooner you get on board with that, the happier you're going to be. But yeah, like, okay, so you feel that there's certain, you feel the world's too boring, and you need conspiracies to be out there to give you your identity and give you your spirituality. It's way more exciting and beautiful than reading about conspiracy theories on the internet. Like
listening to podcasts.
Listen to a podcast.
Yeah.
Our podcast, not those podcasts.
Yeah.
But the other is like, you ever watch a bird build a nest? That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Hey, woodworking is fun.
Woodworking is amazing.
And YouTube videos about woodworking is also fun.
Oh gosh, my Instagram account is so full of like wood turners, like you wouldn't believe. Get a lathe.
You could tell we're pushing 40. We're gonna be the woodcraft
awesome.
guys. Yeah.
Pushing 40 is awesome.
Father Chuck, it's good to have you back, sir.
It's good to have you back. It's good
Thank
to
you.
be back.
Yeah.
We're of course going to be taking like another break.
Probably. Yeah, we definitely this might be our only episode until 2021.
Yep.
Because the holidays are coming up, and I know Chuck will be busy. Matt will probably also be busy. I know I am. But we hope you enjoyed this one episode. Just to let you know that A, we're here, and B, listen, there's some normal people out there, normal thinking people. Things are really insane. But listen, hang tight. All right, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again next time. Have a wonderful holiday.
Yep. Mele Kalikimaka.
What he said. Good journey.
Good journey.